Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Kudalakis, and I'm Senior Marketing Manager here at Progress. Welcome to our Ask Me Anything, What MCP is and how it modernizes the OpenEdge platform webinar. So let's jump in by quickly introducing you to your speakers for today. I am joined by Irfan Syed and Cameron Wright. Irfan is Director of Quality Engineering at Progress with over 18 years of experience and 15 years at Progress. He has worked across many other Progress products, but most primarily on Progress OpenEdge. His contributions include work on the Progress Application Server for OpenEdge, and most recently building the OpenEdge MCP Server and its integration with Progress Agentic RAG. With over 20 years experience, Cameron brings a unique perspective to OpenEdge customers, having worked on both the consulting and engineering side. He excels at listening and helping OpenEdge customers and partners find solutions to complex problems. With a keen eye for looking at code and systems, Cameron has played a pivotal role in helping customers migrate to the latest versions of OpenEdge. I'm really excited to have both Irfan and Cameron with us today, and now I'll turn it over to them to start the discussion.
Thank you, Susan. Really appreciate you giving an introduction for this session. I'm really excited. I'm really delighted to talk about MCP and the role of MCP in OpenEdge. And I'm happy that Cameron and myself were able to talk about this because we too have worked across two different products or two different functionalities of OpenEdge that could use MCP and help our OpenEdge customers. So I'm really excited and delighted. So what is MCP? What is Model Context Protocol? I think if we want to talk about MCP for the past 2 years or more than that, once the AI boom started, we all tried to get the best of the AI, trying to get the information from various different sources. So what eventually happened from the business users or from the functionality is that how can I make sure I just don't want to get the data from internet, rather I would like to get the data that is specific to my functionality, specific to my APIs or specific to my database. How would I do that? So in late November 2024, Anthropic, they came up with a protocol called as Model Context Protocol. It is an open standard that lets AI security models connect to an external data or tools and applications in a consistent, interoperable way. What it lets you do is that you can basically go and communicate with any kind of backend servers if they just have this MCP protocol. That's basically what this is. Let's just dive down and try to see a full big picture of how this end-to-end communication looks like if you're trying to build solutions using Model Context Protocol. In the left side, you have user applications. That could be your IDEs, your chatbots, or your browser-based applications. And then in the user application, you would like to go and communicate with an MCP client for your request. Your request would be, list me a different kind of inventory items that are available in my stock. So with that kind of a question, when you ask that question to the MCP client, it has access to an LLM model, or if you provide access to an LLM model to the MCP client, and that can go and communicate with the backend servers using an MCP protocol. It's as simple as that. Your MCP servers, which are backed by the MCP protocol, could be Salesforce, could be Postgres, could be Vault, could be Amazon S3, could be OpenEdge. It doesn't matter. So if you just follow the protocol, you should be able to go and communicate with the MCP servers, get back the response, and present that response by sharing that information back to the user. The LLM here is responsible for taking the request and then converting that to human readable natural language and present it back to the user. That's exactly what MCP does. Now, if I have to define what MCP protocol is, it's a standardized protocol that lets AI securely access your files, databases, and apps for better answers. No custom integrations are required or needed here in this case because you're just following a protocol, and that protocol really helps you to be interoperable and work exactly across any kind of environment. Now let's think that why would this, whatever I've mentioned so far, is correct or right, or what was the approach before we had the MCP protocol? So imagine the use case where you're trying to build a customer support assistant whose responsibility is to pull orders, create tickets, and it checks the inventory. If I have to build something like that, then I would be building an AI agent, and that AI agent would be by any of the languages that are available right now to go and talk with the LLMs, large language models. which can go and talk with the respective APIs of our business logic. It could be ERP solutions, it could be help desk or warehouse API, or I would have a direct SQL or NLP querying interface agent, which can go and talk with my SQL or ERP or file system. This is good start for anyone to basically build AI solutions or AI agents. But on a long term, you'll eventually have or eventually face different kinds of problems. So let's try to see what kind of problems one would face. Most of them are maintenance and the approach of how you want to build and take it forward problems. And they are maintenance challenges, which is we're trying to create an n times n problem, which is you're trying to build a solution using LLM, using a specific language or a specific SDK, and then you want to build something specific to the LLMs that we have, like OpenAI, Anthropic, Claude, and Gemini, etc., etc. Depending on the situation, depending on this variety of layers in between, if any of them change, you would need to make sure that all of them have to work across the different layers of your AI agent. So it is creating a duplication, number one. Number two is it's creating n solutions, m layers. It's creating an n-time n problem. Security issues, all or nothing access or hard-coded credentials and integrations. If you do not have a proper security because you are trying to build a framework, you're trying to use a framework that's already very plain to go and communicate with your services, so you are responsible for creating security for it. So either you have defined hard-coded credentials, integrations, or you just provide anonymous access. So you are responsible for defining the security when you try to build this custom agents. Performance and efficiency. So every time you try to go and access the data, you eventually are responsible for getting the context, preloading the context and making it available. If you want to do some kind of a smart caching for the sake of the data to be available in a much faster, in a much better and efficient way, you have to perform your smart caching capabilities. And none of this is basically available. So you have to define your own standard and do this for the best of your agentic solution. Scalability limits, integration complexity grows exponentially. As you see, you are trying to create n number of layers in between. And the moment you try to provide support for multiple AI providers, because industry and organizations would not like to stick with one LLM and they would like to provide support for multiple LLMs, multiple different integration facets. So while you do that, you eventually add a lot of complexity where you have to go and communicate with different protocols to get the data. Development and operations overhead. This is the biggest factor, I would say, and that this might lead to why we have come into MCPs, because the kind of effort that one has to keep to build agentic solutions, the beginning is always good. You try to see the solution, you try to see the agentic capabilities, but over the time, the kind of technical debt you accumulate by building the solution, which is specific to yourself, it grows much higher. And the amount of debugging difficulties that one would face while building a custom agent in a heterogeneous systems gets bigger and bigger. And because of this, the business impact is slow time to market for this new AI features, and the cost incurred while performing the integration and maintenance is much, much higher. From here, Cameron is going to talk about MCP architecture.
Okay, let's talk about MCP architecture. MCP from your client side will have a client connector. That's usually on your desktop or hooked up to your IDE. The client, using a MCP protocol layer, a standardized communication layer, will talk to the MCP server. The MCP server then knows how to translate and make the requests that it needs to in the background. It can handle stateful sessioning, fine-grained permissioning, tools, interface, prompts, and resources. Why do we have MCP? It gives us that common talking layer for all AI agents to talk to dissimilar data. The nice thing is when the MCP server is used, it can expose all of these functions to your clients so that it knows the information that it needs to. For instance, get order status, query database, search a repo, initiate a perplexity chat. It provides that standardized interface to dissimilar systems. The function of an MCP server, its basic functions are to expose tools, resources, and prompts. Back at the beginning of the year, MCP didn't exist, and the consortium came together and decided they needed a standardized way of doing this, and they came up with MCP. It's based on JSON RPC communication, and it has two standard protocols, standard IO and HTTP. Tools are external services that can services that the model can access via the MCP protocol. We utilize tools. Tools are ways of querying data, accessing RESTful APIs to retrieve information, reading disks off of file. These are all kind of tools that MCP gives us. Tools also do prompts. And you've probably heard this lots in the internet community, tools and prompts and learning prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is just basically a guide. It's a template that guides the AI to know what it needs to collect, the information that it needs to make sure that the information is relevant. You can think of it as a template or a workflow. So here's a great example of a prompt. Inventory prompt automatically checks a database, applies some business rule, and formats the results. And so you don't have to ask for a prompt. The prompt just knows, and you can ask the user, or the user can ask which items are running low, and the prompt can execute. That's the power of MCP. It brings these tools and prompts together that bring your domain-specific information to the MCP server. Basically, the bottom line is the MCP server is a universal connector between AI and your world or your data. So why would OpenEdge need an MCP server? Irfan?
Thank you, Cameron. So OpenEdge, just like any other product, would like to take advantage of AI. How can we build solutions that would help us to build ecosystem where developers as well as business users can take advantage of AI? So we would like to use that opportunity by building solutions on top of MCP. So what we have done is that we have tried to build two different solutions in OpenEdge using MCP. The first one is OpenEdge MCP Connector, and the second one is OpenEdge MCP Server. OpenEdge MCP Connector is a way where it helps developers to increase their productivity by asking questions with the OpenEdge MCP Connector about ABL, about the language, and how to use the language at the best of the ways that you can. OpenEdge MCP Server is a way where you would like to expose your business logic, business solutions, which are as part of services, to the AI layer. And you could do that by exposing your PaaS RESTful services, which are at the rest of web, to the OpenEdge MCP server, which automatically converts those APIs into MCP tools and expose that to AI ecosystem. Together, these two would help in building and helping developers and business users to build solutions that could be catered and can be provided to be used with AI. The first one being a complete developer productivity tool, and the second one being a server that would help in building AI solutions. Okay, so in this demo, what you would like to do is that we would like to see how we can use our OpenEdge MCP server and try to ask a question that is very much specific with our data, with our OpenEdge data. So we have an MCP server available here, and this MCP server is built on top of Sports 2020 database. So the question that I would like to ask is, show me all the orders for the customer whose name is Mountain Sports, located in New York State. While I try to get this information, I would also like to do something extra, which is also list any similarities in the orders. Now let's try to execute this. First, I start the connect to the server because the server is already started. So I'm connecting from my client. Once it is connected, I would like to go ask this question from my VS Code agent. Once I asked the question, it tried to get the information, and you can see it identified that this specific query can be executed for get BE customer. So it tried to get the customer data. Once it got the customer data, it also got the order information, order lines information, and then it tried to summarize this entire information for the given customer who is from New York. So once it summarized and gave the information about the customer Mountain Sports and the orders, 3 different orders, 18905, 18910, 18915, it then listed out the similarities between what these orders were across different factors, which are sales representatives, discount, credit card preference, order size, etc., etc. So this is the capability that we are going to provide if you are using OpenEdge MCP servers on top of your backend systems, which are PaaS-based RESTful services, which could be exposed as REST or web interfaces, and then you can go and interact with your own data. And now let's try to see how we can do the same things with a different product, which is OpenEdge MCP Connector, and try to see the best way of utilizing that in our ecosystem. Over to you, Cameron.
Thanks, Irfan. Let's talk a little bit about the MCP connector and what its value that it brings to OpenEdge developers. Currently in front of me, I have Visual Studio Code opened up, and it is not connected to the MCP connector. I'm using Claude Sonnet 4.5 as my LLM, and I want to ask it a pretty advanced question, not a very simple question, but a pretty advanced question. I want to ask it about the HTTP client using 12.8, and I want to make an asynchronous call. I'm going to go out, I'm going to give this to the LLM, and the LLM is going to make a decision, or the agent is going to make a decision on how to develop. You'll notice here that the agent has no information based on an asynchronous call of HTTP, and it's gone out and it's actually fetched resources. It's actually going out to the internet. It knows about docs.progress.com, and it's trying to find some sort of reference. The reference has failed, and so it's trying to look at a few more. It's gone out and it's tried to look at a few more. It sees a knowledge base, it sees a communities post. It still doesn't have enough information, and it's continuing to ask. Again, another communities post and another docs request. We now have another fetch. Each one of these is consuming tokens. And this is taking a significant amount of time. You can see that it's fetched. It's fetching another document. It continues to work in the background. We'll let this just keep going. See how long it takes. All right, so it's found some documentation on the OpenEdge documentation. Now it's trying to find asynchronous specific documentation. I wish I had started a clock. So it has come back and it says the HTTP client does not natively support true asynchronous requests. However, it can create a program that demonstrates working around with a wait for statement with a procedure that simulates, I'm not sure about that, simulates asynchronous behavior. Let's see what it comes up with. So it is creating a program. It's summarizing the key points, and it's given me information. Syntactically, it looks correct, but I'm not going to bet the bank on this. So let's move over to using Visual Studio Code with our new OpenEdge MCP connector and providing the documentation directly to the LLM. Now that you've seen what the Visual Studio Code can do when it doesn't have information, you'll notice in this, I have the MCP connector connected at the bottom. You'll notice in the bottom right corner, and you'll see just how much quicker it is when that syntax, documents, and examples are available to the agent to create my program. I'm going to ask exactly the same question to this, to the same agent, to the same LLM, exactly the same question, and you can see now that it summarized the request. It knows that the MCP connector is there. It knows that the syntax is there. You can see it runs a get examples only. It gets some information back, but it doesn't like that it's got enough. It's going to go out and it's going to look for asynchronous in the query. It's going to query documents. It's noticed that it doesn't support asynchronous requests, so it's going to try and figure out another way of doing it. You'll see in here it boldly says HTTP client in 12.8 does not support asynchronous requests. It took the previous demo quite a few minutes to come to that realization. It does say, however, I'm going to create a great demonstration, and it does eventually write the code, and it creates it, and it does talk about the method. And it goes through, and I will tell you that this program does work. So you can see that I've sped just through simply having access to the MCP connector. I've sped up development, and I've sped up development cycles. I've also reduced my token count. Back over to you, Irfan.
Thank you very much, Cameron. It was a fantastic demo, I would say. I mean, seeing that how you can use MCP in a day out job of an OpenEdge developer as well as a business user trying to see some value in it. It's really great. I think the two demos that we have are fantastic, and they really demonstrate how well we can use MCP in the current OpenEdge infrastructure. But how can we use it? How can a developer or how can any OpenEdge users can take availability of this? The first one, you can access the MCP connector. It's available right now. You can download it from the ESD. You can install and configure locally for full control if you would like to have one. Or you could use our hosted Progress Data Cloud platform, which has an MCP connector available. And all you need is to just authenticate and access the MCP connector that's available on the cloud. That MCP connector will be responsible by us for us to upload the right content, for us to maintain the right content. And in order to download and make the MCP server available in your own instance, you can do that using from our ESD. It's available in 12.8, and then you can go to 12.8 ESD, download it, and install it as per the documentation that we have for this product. Thank you very much for listening our talk today on the MCP connector and MCP server. Next slide, please. We are open for questions, and we would like to know how you would like to use MCP in your day in, day out life, day out work life of using OpenEdge applications. And we would like to hear about the different use cases that you want to use. Thanks again.
Thank you, Irfan, and thank you, Cameron, for the great presentation. We have some time for questions, and I see them starting to all come in. If you don't mind just turning your cameras on and saying hello to everybody, that would be super while I get the questions ready.
Sure, let me just make sure my hair is fixed. There we go, hair's fixed. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon.
Hello, everyone.
All right, so I see a ton of questions. I'm going to jump right in. So what capabilities does the OpenEdge backend need to work with the OpenEdge MCP server?
Okay.
That might be a question, Cameron, for you.
I think it's more, I'll let Irfan answer that one.
Thank you. So for MCP, for OpenEdge backend to be used with the MCP server, all it needs is REST APIs and then an OpenAPI spec. If you are using business entities, then we provide an ability from the MCP server CLI that can help you to generate the OpenAPI spec, and then you can easily expose that as an MCP server.
Yeah, I think Irfan, it boils down to web and REST. We can expose web and REST. Those are the two protocols that we can expose that you've currently built and deployed on your PaaS OE instance.
Okay, so the next question is, how are the API contracts developed and enforced?
I think Irfan just mentioned it. We use OpenAPI.
So.
Yeah, OpenAPI is how they're built and enforced.
Okay, here's another question about deployment. Can the MCP server and the MCP connector be deployed locally?
I'll jump on this one, Irfan. So the MCP server absolutely can be deployed locally in your local infrastructure. And it is able to service multiple PaaS instances. So you could have it service a user acceptance testing or multiple PaaS instances in your production environment. The MCP connector, we do have a local version of the rules files that are available for customers to consume. They're updated not as regularly as the SaaS version. So we do have a SaaS version that you can connect to that's in our Progress Data Cloud. And that is updated regularly. So we do understand that there are some customers that are in green networks or gray networks or even black networks that cannot connect to an MCP server outside. So we did produce those files for you. So yes, you can deploy it internally and you can use the external version.
Okay, can you limit the documents it can reach?
I think this was in my example when Claude Sonnet. You can. It's challenging though, because the LLM. I always say that the LLM is like a 6-year-old. You know, you give it a task and it's going to go off and do just whatever the heck it wants. I've tried to limit it in places. It just becomes much more of a pain doing that. It will scour the internet, and it sometimes scours it in places you wouldn't really think it's going to scour it. So. That's the value of the MCP connector. We have all of the documentation examples and syntax in one precise location, and it helps to contain that searching all over. Wouldn't you agree, Irfan?
Yeah, completely agree with you. There are certain ways, best recommendations of doing that, but we try our best to limit that with the MCP connector by providing some kind of guidelines.
Here's another question on REST APIs. What if our business logic is not exposed in REST APIs? Will MCP build those REST APIs for us?
Go ahead, Irfan.
Yes, the two kinds of things that we're talking about. Number one is that building REST APIs and using REST APIs. Building REST API is what MCP connector is. Using REST API is what MCP server is. I'll let Cameron talk about how to build the REST APIs with the MCP connector.
Thanks, Irfan. Yeah, so exactly. So if you don't have REST APIs currently built, we did provide a lot of documentation from docs.progress. We also provided examples from the team that built this. So we have helped to give it instructions on how to build REST APIs. So could you use an agentic agent connected with the MCP connector to help build REST endpoints? Absolutely. You want to add it. You want to make sure you're asking the right questions. So you want to expose the service interface. You want to expose that service interface through a web handler. And those are all things that our professional services team can help you with it. But if you don't have them, you absolutely can use AI to build them for you.
Hey, here's another one for you. Can you use this in OpenEdge Developer Studio?
Currently, the MCP connector does not connect to the OpenEdge Developer Studio. It only connects to VS Code. I do believe there is a way, but I have not tested it or proven it. I'd have to ask others. It would definitely be a community question.
Okay, there are so many questions coming in.
I bet. I see them flying by.
Okay. If somebody has a question on how to configure the MCP connector, say for instance in VS Code, where would they go to look?
There was a post on the CVP. So you have to be part of the CVP. Go to the CVP. There was a post. I believe Rajesh posted it, or one of our PMs posted it. It's in there on how you get access to it.
Okay, great.
And the documentation is online.
All right. So Cameron, here's a question for you. In your demo, do you have data comparing token usage and the two different IDEs in the demo?
See, I knew somebody was going to ask that, and I didn't. I do not, but I could.
Okay.
I could definitely look. You can just tell, having been using AI for almost 9 months now. All of those searches are very expensive. Our pages are kind of big, so I would guess there were significantly different token counts. But I do not have those, unfortunately, and I thought I should probably have those, and I didn't. So next time I'll be more prepared.
Didn't mean to trick you there, Cameron.
No, that's okay. You got me.
Is it true to say that the MCP connector and servers only work with REST APIs, not for the business logic written in 4GL?
That's not completely true. So let's talk on the first point on what is MCP connector. MCP connector helps you to write better ABL code with the help of AI. So to do that, it will help you to write ABL code in whichever format it is. It could be whatever your ABL code is, with whatever documentation references we have. So that is what MCP connector is. MCP server needs the input of an open API spec, which are built using when your services are RESTful services, which could be REST adapter or a REST transport or a web transport, which are built for your OpenEdge services. So if you're writing ABL, and if that ABL service or ABL business logic is exposed as a RESTful service using OpenEdge RESTful services, you're good. It should work.
Cameron, did you have something you wanted to add, or should I go on?
No, I was.
Okay.
No, that's Irfan nailed it. Yeah, it basically boils down to this: if you've exposed your endpoints to REST using web or REST, and you have those RESTful endpoints, then we can access it with the MCP server. If it's still on like app server or something else, then we cannot. You have to expose those somehow.
Okay, so here's a question about PAS-OE. Does the OpenEdge MCP server run within PAS-OE? For example, inside Apache Tomcat, how does it function internally, and how does it integrate with our data sources and APIs?
The MCP server, which we have released, so that runs as a layer in front of the PAS-OE server. So it does not sit inside PAS-OE, it sits in front of PAS-OE, so that you can have proper security and well-defined communication between your PAS-OE servers. So the MCP server sits in front of PAS-OE as a deployable instance, and that can go talk with your PAS-OE instance securely.
Right, and it's not a one-to-one, Irfan, right? You can run multiple different PAS instances in the MCP server. You just have to delineate and differentiate them to the AI agents. So yes, and that was one of the reasons we did that, is we wanted it to be a separate appliance that could service multiple instances.
Right, so you can create multiple number of MCP servers, and each one of them can point to one or to each different endpoints where you can achieve a specific functionality. For example, if you want to have something regarding your warehouse inventory kind of business logic, and you have an open API spec for that, you point to that PAS-OE instance, and then you want to have another MCP server which can do something very specific to your internal purposes, you can do that too. So you can have as many MCP servers you want.
Here's another one for you. How good is the MCP connector with handling code improvement prompts? Of course, the results depend on the used AI agent.
I've had great success, but again, it depends on what you ask and how you ask it. And I always caveat it that, remember, LLMs and AI agents are about 6-year-olds. So if you give it too broad of a question, it'll go off and do some really weird things for you. But if you give it very specific questions, it does a great job. I've had great success doing code reviews, pre-branch commit code reviews, and helping with small modernizations. I also have looked at, I know that some of our business partners have looked at using Claude and some of the deep agentic AI agents that can do large format refactoring, and have had pretty good success with it. So watch the community. It's out there. It's happening. The nice thing about AI, Susan, is it gets better and better. Anthropic releases about every Thursday or Friday. So the agents get better and better. The LLMs get smarter and smarter each time. I believe that Anthropic has an LLM that recodes itself every night. So they're getting smarter and smarter.
Agree.
Okay, Cameron, you mentioned Claude in your last answer. Is Claude Sonnet required to use MCP for development?
It is not. Claude Sonnet is the LLM that I choose to use in VS Code. It seems to be the one that is the leader right now in code development. I know, sure, some of my colleagues would disagree with me. I prefer a more natural language LLM where I can have a full conversation with it and it can produce code. But Claude Sonnet isn't the one that you have to use. I know that Claude Opus is out. And they've had some great success with Claude Opus. It just seems to be the one that works for me today.
Okay, there are so many questions. I don't know if we're going to get to everything, but we'll get my best to get through them all today. Does the AI MCP connector support Progress OpenEdge 12.2 or only 12.8?
We have provided 12.2 and 12.8 language constructs into the MCP connector, and we will update those as we go. It is also stubbed for 13 as we move 13 forward. And before anybody asks, no, it does not have 11, and no, we will not load. No, we will not load 11. We want you to move.
Okay, so here's another one for you. Does the MCP connector look at your existing code base to write any new ABL code?
It can. Yes, again, it depends on the prompt and the context. If you tell it to look at your older code and use it as a template, it can be very helpful. You can also, I've had success with this, use this as a template for what not to do. I want you to develop me new modern class-based code. So yes, it can look at your code. There are some really great tools out there called DeepWiki. DeepWiki does a full deep scan of your entire code base. And and some of the great things that have advanced with Mermaid documents. If you don't know about Mermaid documents, look them up. It will. You can ask it to build Mermaid documents of your old code, build Mermaid documents of new code, and then it can help you translate between the two of them. It will help make that move. So the person that asked about code modernization, there's lots of great tools out there. But I got to tell you, I probably spend 10 to 15% of my day researching new stuff. And then I use the power of AI to move that forward.
There's another one for you. Does the MCP server need to be accessible from the internet, or is it enough to be able to access it from the user's local computer inside a local network?
Yeah, so MCP server doesn't need to have access to the internet. MCP client is the one that needs access to the internet, because MCP server is just like your Password instance at this point of time. But for the MCP client to go and communicate with the MCP server, get the data, and once it gets the response, it wants to translate that into natural language. So that is the part that is done by the MCP client, which is part of your AI agent. So that's the only part that requires internet, but the server doesn't need internet.
Here's another one for you. Considering there are many ways to accomplish the same thing with ABL, can the MCP connector work with approaches that are used in our application code? For example, using or not using OOABL with procedure code?
Yes, yeah, again, it depends on the prompt that you ask and the way you set it up. You want to make sure that you're, and not to get too deep into too much technical, but inside of VS Code, there's a copilot-instructions markdown file. And in there, you put basic rules of what you want your project to do and what you want AI to do. And in there, you can simply say, hey, listen, I prefer developing procedural as opposed to using objects. I prefer work tables over temp tables. So you can define those, you can define your company standards in there. That's one of the great things about our professional services offering. We have a Jumpstart course that's offered. It's, I believe it's 3 days. If somebody professional service can help me out, I believe it's 3 days. And we send in a consultant to help you connect your MCP connector, help you review your code and build some of your Copilot instructions, your code review instructions, really help you launch yourself rapidly. Can you do it on your own? Absolutely. Roland, Ruben, and myself spent 6 months doing this. I don't know that you really want to spend 6 months doing it. Those 3 days are quite valuable, having somebody come in and help you get your team up and running and very quickly moving.
That's a great plug for our services team, Cameron.
Of course.
I'm sure they'll thank you. We can make sure that we include the link in the follow-up materials for folks that
Absolutely.
are looking for more information. Let's keep
Absolutely.
going. Can the MCP connector help with refactoring, like adding structured error handling in a project or transitioning code from procedural to OO?
Absolutely. I have tested it, tried it, worked it. If you set up your structured error handling as a code review rule, when you tell it to code review this code before you check it in, it will find all structured error handling. It will make sure that you find all your procedure level blocking. It'll even watch for share locks. And I've also had success with it watching for excessive reads.
A lot of people, I see a lot of people are asking for some reference material and some questions about where to go and how to find information. Here, that's what this next question is about. Is there a guide for how to integrate the MCP connector into VS Code?
There, it's on the CVP. It's in the post on the CVP.
Yeah, there's another question about documentation. So, and the same thing. Let's keep going. I don't understand this question. Maybe you do. Can the MCP server hack your PaaS instance? I had to ask it. I don't know.
Yeah, it depends on what do you mean, how you want it to be hacked, right? So MCP server, first of all, it's our product. So we made sure that in order to communicate with the MCP server, by default, it's not anonymous. By default, it's secure. By default, it's secured with the token. And if you want to enhance that, you can add more level of security, which is you basically can add your OAuth 2 kind of security, which standard MCP servers provide. So the next thing that it does is that to talk with the PaaS server, you can basically configure your best practices that you follow in order to communicate with the PaaS server, which are your client principles that you go and communicate. If you have configured OAuth 2 or any kind of authentication, you can use that and you can talk. The MCP server can act as a client and can go and talk with the PaaS servers. In addition to that, we have very strong logging, audit logging in the MCP server, and then we also pass the information in the PaaS so that who is talking it's something that we can record in the PaaS instance. And then we have certain security principles inside MCP server where you can do some authorization and who can see what kind of functionalities and APIs. So we have all of that covered. So depends on how you want to hack from MCP server to PaaS. You have to first define all of this, and then you can make sure that no one can hack it.
Someone actually just commented while you were chatting, Irfan, that said do penetration testing.
Of course, go for it. And we did penetration testing, by the way, when we actually had the MCP server and with PaaS, and then we had our own report saying that what it can do, what it cannot do, and we fortunately didn't find anything even we had the security and everything enabled.
Okay, this person asked, I think, 3 questions. So I'll start with one. What is the theme you use to have visualized the progress ABL code?
What theme did I use to visualize it? So I use dark. I use Visual Studio in dark theme mode. I also exclusively use the Riverside plugin for that, for all code highlighting and code visualization.
Okay. The next question is, how do you connect from Visual Studio Code to the database in order to compile?
The Riverside plugin.
Okay, and the last question in that series of 3 was, which version do you need to download in the download center in order to edit ABL code in VS Code?
Ask it again, Susan?
Yeah, which version do you need to download in the download center in order to edit ABL code in VS Code?
Well, VS Code you download from Microsoft, and the Riverside Progress plugin you download from the marketplace. And then the MCP connector is just a configuration. There is a plugin file that's on the CVP that you use. So I guess that's the best answer I can give without having a little more context.
I'm sure there will be a follow-up to that one.
I'm sure.
This one is kind of a fun one. Where can we get lively discussions about AI in the Progress community so we can learn together? And I think this is a good plug for Discord right here.
Yeah, jump on the Discord. We're all on it.
So that will be for folks that are on the on the webinar today, and folks that are listening online after, we're going to be sending out a link to that so you can join. Let's see here. I'm trying to go through these questions. People are asking for, some people are saying thank you for the time for Q&A. I have a very funny comment, Cameron, if you'd like me to read it. It says don't refer to it.
Go ahead.
We got to have a little bit of fun every now and then. Don't refer to
course.
it as a 6-year-old. It's more like a teenager in his or her worst period.
Yeah. Although teenagers you can sometimes reason with, 6-year-olds you can't reason with.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Mine's 7. Okay. Is there any way how to integrate with administrative DB and PASOE routines?
I'm sorry, what's the question again?
Yeah. Is there any way how to integrate with administrative DB and PASOE routines? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that question is for the MCP connector or the MCP server.
Okay.
If you're talking about the MCP server, then if you have APIs, then it can monitor or do administration of anything.
Yeah.
So for example, if you have OE manager and you have exposed OE manager, you can basically monitor OE manager from the MCP server and say, hey, shut down my password, restart my password, stop my agent, restart my agent, terminate my session, etc., etc.
There's no direct database access with the MCP server. That was one of the things we discussed early on, and we came to that. We felt that for security reasons, everything needed to go through an API, and we decided it should go through web or a web handler, or it should go through REST. So if anybody's going to ask, do we have plans on exposing the database to the MCP server? We do not.
And if you want to expose the database, you can do that using business entities.
Using business entities, right. Yep.
Here's another question for you guys. You got a ton of questions. We have about 10 minutes left for folks. So please take a minute and ask your questions. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. Here's another one. We have some older procedural code and also some newer OO code in the same build. Can we use agent.md files to guide behavior depending on how the source is structured in the file system?
Absolutely. You can build your agents, and you can set you absolutely. Again, be very specific. Don't make any assumptions. Be very specific in your agent instructions.
Does this integrate with OpenEdge Command Center?
I don't know that it's something that would connect. Like they're entirely different. They're not the same. You're asking, one's a car and one's a boat. So I don't. Irfan, your thoughts?
I have no idea. So we haven't made any conscious efforts on integrating with OpenEdge Command Center. We might want to do enhancements to OpenEdge Command Center for sure, but we haven't thought about like any of them to be integrated with that.
Yeah. The deploy.
Yeah.
The deploy and the config of MCP server is all command line. It's really quite well done. It's all command line. It's all, we made it quite robust. You can make it very simple, or you can tweak the configs a lot. So
this one's kind of long, but I think I'm going to sum it up. Is there an intention to evolve the connector and provide additional tools so AI can read and search through my code base in the future?
I would hope there is, the advancements that we can make in the connector, just by adding examples and best practices. The plan is to continue to enhance it.
So we provide a tool set right now, but then adding a tool set is one part of it. Then enhancing the data is another part of it. So enhancement of data will always happen, will continue to happen from our side.
Yep. And I think that some of the PS team are looking at prompts, trying to address some of those, how do we modernize, what some of those different prompts out there that we talked about, that I talked about in the demo earlier. Prompts are key. They're the template as to how the AI gets those information. It's that instructions, right? So when you give the 6-year-old a shopping list to go to the store and buy, bread and milk and whatnot, That's what those prompts really are. And I just aged myself because when I was a kid, my mother sent me to the store to buy eggs and milk. So.
If we have Swagger docs implementation in front of our data, is this a usable point of information to the MCP?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
For the MCP server, that's the only input it needs. It needs a Swagger or OpenAPI specification.
Some people asked about pricing.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
it's the best price.
So MCP server, it comes with 12.8. If you're on 12.8, you can basically go to the ESD and you'll able to find that to download. So you just need to be on the latest version. That's it.
Yep. So you need to be on 12.8 and it's included in your licenses. MCP, if you have maintenance, is included in your maintenance agreement. So it's all
connected, right?
So yeah, the connector. Sorry, yeah, the connector. If you have active maintenance, you have access to it.
Hey, is PASOE a requirement for use of the MCP server?
Yes, PASOE is a requirement for the use of MCP server. The reason is that there are a lot of things like security that are very much important for us to understand how we want to communicate with the application logic. So PASOE is a definite requirement if you want to make sure you're securely communicating with your OpenEdge backend.
Correct.
All right, I'm still going through the questions. Trying to clean them up because there's so many. People are asking about sample projects. Where can they go to find information on that?
I believe the sample products are about MCP Connector or the MCP server. If you're talking about the MCP server, we have the documentation available right now. If you go to docs.progress.com, we have documentation for the MCP server in detail, how to start with it and how to go over it. And we'll over the time we'll do more and more on like blogs or some videos or anything like that. So please go ahead and first look into that area, and then if you do not have the information, then definitely come back to us. Cameron, do you have any answers about MCP Connector?
I would have to reach out to my friends in professional services to find out what they have. I know that we've spent time building, a repository that's got best practices in it. So that would be, that we'd have to reach out to Roland or Ruben. Your best place to start is in the Americas, Chris Longo, and in Europe, I would say Roland DePiper. Reach out to those two guys and see what they have, and they can get you going. I know they exist. I just don't know exactly where.
All right, so I'm getting a lot of questions about people that need additional demos and some other things. So I'm not going to ask those questions. We'll probably take those and review after. I think we might have time for one more. If you guys are
hey, that's all. That's all you, Susan. If you want to schedule a webinar, I'm sure that Irfan and I can do webinars, and I'm sure these folks will ask 1.5 million questions. So
we left plenty of time for questions, and unfortunately, we're running out. So let me just ask one more.
Okay.
All right. Can the MCP server replace existing business logic by exposing bare data or create BEs for the data?
So there are a couple of ways to think about it, right? So as I was saying earlier, if your data is all about reading some data and you already have databases where you want to expose this business entities to just read the data, then yes, you could just use business entity and that's it. That's good enough. But if you have a complex logic where you basically want to write, which can perform multiple iterations on validating the data, I wouldn't rely on doing something other than writing a prompt. I would rather like to do that in my ABL application. I would like to validate that in my ABL application and then use that as an API. That is what my take is. When I want to do something, I would like to do it the lowest layer of my application. So logic, so that is my ABL code.
Okay, and I guess to follow up on that, we did load up the way to build and define business entities is provided in the MCP connector. If you prompt the right question to the agent about building a business entity, it does know how to build a business entity. And I know all of you are being great coders out there, and you're keeping your database definitions and your database structure files in your repository as an artifact in your repository. If you simply point to the DF and the structure file, the agent is smart enough to understand the DF and the structure file, and it can build base naked business entities for you. I wouldn't put them to production because they're, they're pretty open, they're pretty basic CRUD, they're keys to the kingdom, but at least it's a great starting point if you wanted to build some. So you can take a look
Or
at
if
that.
you don't want to do that, then you can basically use your IDE, PDSOE basically, and then point your
PDSOE.
tables, and then it'll generate your business entities.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's literally, it's a right click, new business entity, and a couple of prompts and it's done. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite easy.
Okay, so there's still questions coming in. I'm going to give people time to ask, but I think we're going to be out of time. But I do have one more quick question because I think this is a quick one, and then we'll wrap up from everybody. Is the MCP server available on OEDK subscriptions?
Not sure about that. I think it's only available on the EST for PASOE. I can check with the product manager.
We can most certainly check that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're getting a lot of excellent sessions. Thank you guys for your time.
Yep.
And from all of us here at Progress and from Cameron and Irfan, thank you all for your time today. We're going to wrap up. I know there were a lot of questions. We'll capture all of these questions and get back to folks.
I'll be on Discord for most of the day, folks. So hop on over and we'll try and answer some of your questions.
Thank you, folks.
Right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.